ammo, and more. Plus, all Smith & Wesson firearms will be on sale during this event. Visit your Shoot Point Blank store for details.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, getting back to impeachment matters and former Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch's testimony on Friday. In addition to the exchange with Chris Stewart, Republican from Utah, where she conceded she had no knowledge of any bribery involving the president that took place or any criminal wrongdoing, she ceded to the idea that the president has every right, the discretion to withdraw, recall an ambassador, something that she had said previously back in 2008 when she was the ambassador to Armenia and the prospect of being recalled by Obama during that period where the administrations were changing over. So that's an obvious point.
But
And then there was the exchange with Jim Jordan. And this is important, too, because she's presented, much like Kent and Taylor, as a nonpartisan person who served many presidents, Republican and Democrat. She has no axe to grind here. There's no politics here. She's just a professional foreign service officer. Well, okay, if that's the case, then why did you treat different instances of a similar category differently, was the point that Jordan was getting to in his questioning.
And of course, we have Mr. Lashenko, a member of parliament, who was a source for Fusion GPS and now somewhat famous dossier that flowed from Fusion's work. He said this in the Financial Times again in August of 2016 when you first arrived in Ukraine. He said this: the majority of Ukrainian politicians are on Hillary Clinton's side. So you had several high-ranking officials in the government, in the Ukrainian government, and President Poroshenko is president of Ukraine, criticized President Trump, then candidate Trump, all in the late summer and fall of 2016. What I want to know, Ambassador, when this was all happening, did you go talk to anyone in the Ukrainian government about this? Did you go say to some of these officials, hey, you guys need to knock this off, this perception that we got, as Mr. Lashenko said, the majority of Ukrainian politicians on Hillary Clinton's side, that's not good. Did you have that conversation?
No.
Didn't talk to anyone in the government? Did you talk to President Poroshenko?
No.
Didn't alert anyone in the government?
No.
So here's the thing. Bipartisan support is critical. That's why this can't be seen to be partisan. That's why we can't be meddling in each other's elections, because you have to have bipartisan support for Ukraine and against Russian aggression. Well, if you need bipartisan support, then you were not concerned at all that you had all these Ukrainian politicians openly being hostile to Trump and supporting Hillary Clinton. Politico reported on this in January of 2017 under the headline, Ukrainian efforts to sabotage Trump backfire. No concern, though. And Jordan goes on in this vein, and Yovanovitch says something interesting. She basically says that this discourse, this is just politicians talking, politicians bloviating. It's not systematic, and so it's not interference.
I think from my point of view, that doesn't create a Ukrainian government strategy to interfere in our election.
I didn't say that.
Mr. Jordan, please allow the ambassador to answer the question.
So I would just say that, U.S. politicians will often criticize policies of foreign counterparts, even perhaps during their elections. This happens in politics, and I think that it doesn't necessarily constitute interference.
Would you ever write an op-ed critical of a presidential candidate in Ukraine?
Jordan.
Yeah, well, what rises to the level of election interference? A court in Kiev found that Ukrainian actors had interfered with the election, specifically with respect to releasing payments by a Ukrainian political party to Trump's then campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. the so-called Black Ledger documents. The court said the publication of those payments led to, quote, led to interference in the electoral processes of the United States in 2016 and harmed the interests of Ukraine as a state. So it was more than just rhetorical excess from politicos, wasn't it? And that didn't concern you at all. I don't hear any discussion of what our Ukrainian Foreign Service personnel did with respect to that. That's what a Kiev court found. That's what a Ukrainian court found. So you can't just dismiss it as, oh, that's just politicians back and forth. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor, contributing editor to National Review, the author of the book he hopes Trump will tweet out at some point, Ball of Collusion, the plot to rig an election and destroy a presidency. Andy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. The president's actually been very kind to me about the book. He's tweeted about it twice and even mentioned it in his UN speech in September. I was.
Oh, wow.
What did he say?
My jaw dropped. He likes it. So, good, right?
I don't keep track of his tweets the way Adam Schiff does, so sorry I missed those.
We'll put that up on the big board.
I do keep track of his tweets about me.
Absolutely. You had a write-up on on Fridays and the lead up to Friday, frankly, all of the impeachment proceedings. One of the things that you tackled, though, was this other transcript, phone call transcript or summary that was released, a transcript, a summary of a call between Trump and Zelensky from earlier in the spring after Zelensky was first elected. And you suggested that releasing that memorandum, summarizing that call, was not helpful to the president. Why is that?
Well, I think on balance, it is harmful. I don't think, by the way, I want to be clear, I don't think they're close to having an impeachable offense here. So
right.
what we're talking about are the little things that go on in a game where the outcome is already determined, right? So that's what we're sort of focused on. So I don't want to convey the idea that I think he made a monumental error, but I think on balance, this is a net negative for him because it doesn't prove anything that was in doubt. That is, if you read the July 25th transcript and you listen to what Zelensky and some others have said, the transcript, Zelensky being the president of Ukraine, there's no one suspected that President Trump had done anything threatening in their first conversation. So, to put that out to underscore how friendly and non-threatening the course of the conversations was I think unnecessary because nobody sensible suspected otherwise. But by putting it out, number one, they show that the readout that the White House put out about the conversation does not reflect the actual conversation, which puts in doubt all of the readouts that the White House puts out. And what I mean by that is the readout the White House put out said that, the president and Zelensky talked about combating corruption in Ukraine, and there's nothing about that in the call. It gave the fact that they did it right, they put it out right as the hearing was about to begin, gave Schiff an opportunity, which he exploited to a fairly well, to say, well, gee, we're real happy to get this transcript, but what about the hundreds of other things the White House is withholding from us? And then he was able to catalog it. And the other problem is every time you put out this kind of information, it conveys to other countries that we can't keep a secret. We can't maintain confidentiality when their high-level officials, including the heads of state, speak to our high-level officials and our president. And we need to have a situation where we can have candid conversations with the countries, both the countries that are allied with us and countries that we're in more hostile positions with.
Well,
and
do you
when
think,
you convey the idea that you can't keep a secret,
Yeah, it doesn't work well. Did the White House purposely leave out the word Burisma, do you think?
I really don't think so. I mean, people who have, Morrison's testified about this. Even Vindman, who is probably the most hostile of the National Security Council witnesses who've testified, he was the one who suggested that there might be some stuff that's left out of the transcript. But as the testimony came out, he says that the transcript is reasonably accurate for a summary. And his boss, Morrison, says that Vindman proposed some edits to the transcript, and Morrison accepted every one of Vindman's proposals. And having done a lot of wiretap cases as a prosecutor, when you see ellipses in a transcript like we see here, that usually means, when you're reading a document as opposed to a transcript of a conversation, when you see ellipses, that ... that often means that we're leaving out words because they're not essential to the point that's being made. When you see ellipses in a transcript, what that tends to mean is that not that words have been omitted, but that somebody, their voice trailed off, or there was they interrupted their thought with another thought. And if you think about the way that President Trump speaks sometimes, particularly when he's in an area where I think where he thinks a point needs to be made, but he's not completely up on the details, he tends to talk in kind of choppy half sentences where he has like a half a thought or two-thirds of a thought, and then he jumps onto something else. And to me, that's how that part of the conversation reads. So I don't see that at all.
Over the weekend, there was more closed-door testimony as well, and Republicans Mark Meadows and Lee Zeldin were already calling for the release of the transcript of Mark Sandy's testimony. Mark Sandy is a White House Office of Management and Budget official, and the suggestion from Zeldin and Meadows is that Sandy undermined the Democrats' narrative about the basis for withholding the aid to Ukraine. But so just going back to what you said about Schiff, and he's got now the release of that April call gives him standing to say, well, what about the other documents? Republicans still have this sort of running complaint against Schiff, which is release these transcripts. Turn these transcripts around so that they can be included in the discussion in real time, not we're going to release these, we're going to have this testimony, then we're going to decide if this is somebody that's helpful to the case to call, then I'll decide if the transcripts will be released. Release the transcripts. It doesn't take long to type this thing up.
Yeah, they're absolutely right about that. They should have the transcripts available to them when they are examining the other witnesses, because the information now, the way this would work if the federal rules of evidence applied, which they don't in a hearing like this, would be that you can't impeach a witness with another witness's statement. But you can use the information that you get from other witnesses as a good faith basis to challenge the testimony of other witnesses. In other words, if A gives testimony that, a certain thing happened on a certain day, and B gives testimony that, no, it didn't happen that way, or it happened on a different day, you can use B's information to cross-examine A, and they should be allowed to do that. That would be in any proceeding, certainly in any court proceeding, they would be permitted to do that. So, again, the problem that the Democrats have had from the beginning here, and I think the problem that the public will have with the process here, is that it's not fair. Schiff has taken to himself the ability to pick and choose what information gets put out, the ability to pick and choose what witnesses are allowed to testify. Nobody thinks he is an honest broker. He is not, a Peter Rodino type. He's not somebody who is thought to be a model of bipartisan scrupulousness that we've had in prior impeachment proceedings. He's a political, partisan, hardball operative, and if I were the Republicans, I would, since they have to play the hand they're dealt, and he can block them from calling witnesses, I would make him the focus of the hearing, because he is the focus of the hearing. He's sitting there in the middle. He's the most imposing, consistent figure in this whole process. So I would keep bringing it back to him that he's been utterly unfair and that he's running essentially a kangaroo proceeding.
Yeah, I mean, you had Jennifer Williams, Pence staffer. She was, deposed on Saturday. I would like to have her testimony be public. But what about the whistleblower? Do you think he should be unmasked and we should have a public, hearing for him?
Yes, I think, first of all, and it should be done before Vindman testifies. The game that the Democrats are playing is they apparently, you could see this in the transcript of his closed-door testimony, when they start to ask about the whistleblower and whether he leaked stuff to the whistleblower and whether he's in cahoots with the whistleblower, Schiff jumps in and cuts it off on the ground that they're trying to reveal the whistleblower and he's got a legal right to remain confidential. He does not have a legal right to remain confidential. First of all, the whistleblower statute that they're talking about does not apply to this guy, because we're not talking about intelligence activities. This is the president dealing in foreign policy with a head of state. So the statute doesn't even apply to him. But even if it did, it only imposes a confidentiality requirement on the Inspector General of the Intelligence Committee or community. And even with respect to the Inspector General, confidentiality can be pierced if he thinks under the circumstances it's unavoidable that the guy will become public, or, and this is very important, if there was any way the matter was likely to be referred to a court for trial or to the Justice Department for potential prosecution. What that underscores is people's desire to be confidential is something that we defer to only so far and no further. Once you're in a position where your information is relevant to an important proceeding like a judicial trial, or I would argue like an impeachment proceeding, you lose your interest in being confidential has to take a back seat to the public's interest and the proceedings' interest in getting at the truth. And they are entitled to examine Vindman to see if he's in cahoots with this guy against the president. The president is entitled to make his defense. So, this thing that the Democrats are doing is really insidious, claiming that this guy has whistleblower protection and then using that as a shield to prevent Republicans from effectively examining Vindman. That's what they're doing.
He is Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, contributing editor to National Review, the book which the president has endorsed, Ball of Collusion, the plot to rig an election and destroy a presidency. Andy, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Have a great week.
You too.
You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Signature Bank is Chicago's fastest growing independently owned business bank. It's a bank where relationships still matter. Signature Bank knows your name and your story. I'm Dan Proft, and I know this because Signature Bank is my business bank.
I'm Larry Nora, founder and